Hi everyone, Marco here, the guy in the cat onesie who loves to work on LED projects. Well, it looks like I can throw most of the code I wrote for my Glowing Stripes project out of the window now. And I'm actually excited about this. Let me explain you why and also how I got into resin 3D printing in May and what next LED project I will work on now. This and more in another episode of my monthly development updates. Let's get into it. So first, let's talk about 3D printing, since that was what I was mostly busy with this last month, or let's say a lot of the time. I basically switched from a regular FDM-based 3D printer to a new resin-based 3D printer. So the main difference between those two is that a regular 3D printer basically melts plastic, which then gets pushed out of a nozzle, and then it's printing an object layer by layer, step by step. On the other hand, a resin-based 3D printer basically have at the very bottom of the printer UV lights that then harden some resin in a tub that's basically above it. And in between you have a display that can whether turn black, which means no light is coming through, or white, which means that the UV light gets through and that on that area the fluid resin will harden. And this way you can basically harden the whole layer all at once. And by now putting a build plate on top of it, you can basically make it stick to the build plate, and you can move up the build plate again, let resin flow in, and repeat the same process. And this way you basically 3D print an object step by step and literally pulling it out of the fluid. It does come with its own advantages and new problems. So what are the advantages of resin 3D printing? First of all, it's way more detailed. Like the resolution, especially with this more modern resin 3D printers, is pretty impressive. There's a good reason why people have been using resin 3D printers for creating highly detailed figures for like board games and stuff like this. But it can also be used for like larger objects. You can also this way add fine text that's still very readable. That with a regular 3D printer, like the slicer wouldn't even calculate the text because it cannot print it. Well, basically, yeah, wouldn't print it in the end. So quality is the one thing. Speed is another. Depending on what you print, resin 3D printers can be way faster because the printing time does not depend on how many milliliter of resin you print in this case, but it depends only on the amount of layers you print. So if you have like 200 layers where there's just one object, and you have 200 layers with 20 objects, it takes exactly the amount of time, pretty much. That's very different with regular 3D printers. And yeah, what else? Well, the main reason why I actually switched was reliability. I had huge issues with the regular 3D printer that I used, the Prusa Mini. To be fair, probably my fault while building up the printer, but the thing is you just have a lot of moving parts with regular 3D printers. And there are a lot of possible failures then. And failures that are not exactly obvious to someone who just gets started into 3D printing. And even if you are more familiar with them, it can take a while sometimes to figure out what's wrong. But yeah, with resin 3D printing, on the other hand, there's literally just one moving part, and that's the axis that's moving up and down. Also, they typically all come already pre-assembled, and literally the only thing you have to do is just quickly setting the bed level, and that's it, and you're ready to go. So yeah, and to be fair, after all the prints that I did, all the test prints and wheel cases that I printed so far with the resin 3D printer, not once did the 3D printer itself have any issues, unlike with the previous printer I used. However, resin 3D printing created its own challenges. So let's talk about the downside of resin 3D printing. The first one is that you need a lot more equipment for getting a proper workflow and also for your own safety. Fumes by the resin, as well as the resin itself, is something you not really want to get in contact with. So you don't want to breathe it in and you don't want it on your skin. If it does happen, it's not going to be the end of the world as long as you quickly wash everything and so on, and as long as you don't breathe too much of it in. But if you work with resin 3D prints for longer periods of time on a regular basis, you really want to use both some really decent gloves or just switch like these nitrile, whatever, gloves on a regular basis, and use some protective mask, like the one that you use for spray painting, not the FFP2 one. The other issue with resin 3D prints is the support. Or let's say you have to think differently when it comes to supports. I wouldn't generally call that an issue. Regular 3D prints, you don't want to use supports because they're just ugly to work with and a pain to remove. It's something resin 3D printing has a little bit in common with, but the difference is how you position the support material. To keep the story short, if you have a very flat object, the most intuitive thing would be to just print it on the build plate, right? But in practice, that's most likely not a good idea, at least if it's a large object with a lot of weight on it. So what you actually want to do to make sure it really prints successfully and properly without warping and so on is having supports and tilting the object like 30 degrees or something, an angle, so that the supports are, that the contact with the build plate itself is as small as possible, and that you have the supports basically ending on different levels and not all at once, which would create this one very weak point where the object can then just fall off or just bend because of this. So yeah, also because the fumes that a 3D printer creates, you do not want to have such a 3D printer in the room where you sleep. And also in your apartment, you only want to have it if you have like a really decent air filtration system or like air extractor system where you basically get the air from the 3D printer or like the room out. Yeah, one of the nice advantages that I haven't mentioned yet of resin 3D printing is that you can mix materials very easily and you can mix their properties very easily because of that. So if you want to have in a resin, like a material, for example, that's very strong but also flexible, you can mix a resin that's very strong and rigid with one that's flexible. Or if you want to have something that has a different color, you can just add like a color to it, or you can mix them as well. You can even add metallic powder to it to create this really nice metallic look. However, I strongly advise against that specifically, because even while it does work up to a certain amount of metallic powder at least, it's just a pain to clean up later. Like it really sticks in all the tiny gaps where you do not want the metal powder to be in, and also it's gonna stick in your in the cleaning fluid, which is something you also need for 3D prints, for resin 3D prints cleaning, and it's just gonna make all the other prints messy as well. So don't use the metallic powder except you have some extra resin tub for that and some extra isopropanol just for such prints. Yeah, otherwise it gets really annoying. Speaking of cleaning though, so one of the processes that you also have to do with resin 3D prints is that after you print them, you cannot just touch them because again, you don't want this on your skin. So you have to first wash it off with isopropanol. At least that's like the recommended way. You could theoretically also not wash it off. But then you have basically have more details if you better details if you've moved the remaining resin on top. And after that, and after you let it dry, you then have to cure it, basically making sure that the top layer is really properly cured. It's like for another 2 minutes or so. You put it in like some kind of curing station, or you could even put it in the sun, but that's not really good because you don't know like how much the sun actually lights up, like UV light, So it's very going up and down and not very predictable. So just getting a washing a cure station makes a lot of sense. But yeah, so it does sound more complicated than regular 3D printing. In some way it is, but the thing is you really save a lot of time when it comes to maintenance of the actual 3D printer. And that was really the main issue I was thinking about. That I didn't want to spend a lot of time frustrating with the 3D printer, not understanding what the heck is going on here. But instead, if a print is failing, it's because of me. And it's obviously because of me, because I was not using enough support, or I was using not strong enough support. And yeah, things like this. Or if the resin is like super cold. That's the other thing. You want to make sure that the resin is like at higher room temperature, basically, like 20, 25 degrees, possibly even 30. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So what's my conclusion about resin 3D prints? Well, do I regret switching from the regular 3D printer? No. Despite that I really underestimated how much equipment I need in addition to the printer to like properly work with it. It's like the level of detail that you have that you just simply cannot get with regular 3D prints, together with the easy combination of multiple materials and to combine their properties, and that you have like some really super smooth objects, something was also very difficult with some materials on the regular 3D printer. And yeah, and that combined with that, so far, the 3D printer itself had no issues whatsoever, are giving me hope for the next few weeks and months of like 3D printing. I think that even the remaining issues I still have, primarily that I have this really annoying looking limestone-ish surface. It's something I hopefully also will figure out, and even if I won't, well, there's spray paint. You can literally put spray paint on the object, which in many cases I will do anyway. So I don't worry too much about that part. And when it comes to supports and the ugly areas where I remove the support, well, if it really matters a lot, use sandpaper. So one of the things I 3D printed with the new resin printer was the glowing core. A new design that I made for basically having a compact case for the microcontroller as well as the microphone to control the LED strips. It's supposed to be easy to remove from the case, and then you can just take it and use it in any other LED project you want. And that's also what I'm gonna do for future projects, basically using this core and using it in most of my LED projects, as long as they're not too tiny, basically, for this case. And speaking about software, I also made progress with the front end and especially with the software updater. And now basically I had a version running where you just open the web interface to control the LED strips. It will automatically notify you if there's a new software update available, and then you can easily just do the software update and the rest is happening in the background. And yeah, it worked pretty great, at least when running it on one device and not having multiple LED strips running at the same time. But that's a topic I will come back in a second to. This month I also worked on stuff beyond just software and hardware, packaging and manuals. I basically started writing a manual for the Glowing Stripes project, like a quick starting guide that allows people to easily get started with setting up their LED strip once they receive it or once they just build it themselves. And also started thinking a bit about the packaging and how to send the product as well. And the bigger context why I started thinking about the manual and packaging was that I planned on how I could build up my own new portfolio website, and also including a new online shop on that website, basically as an addition to the Etsy web shop, just to have some extra options and more independence from Etsy itself as well. But one of the things that made this month also very exciting was that I started to work on not just the Glowing Stripes project and the core that's powering it and other LED projects, but also the next bigger LED project I want to work on, the Glowing Arms version 2.0. So basically glowing wristbands for dancing and long-term exposure photography. And if you might remember, I made a video about the first one a while ago, showing how you can build it yourself, what the story behind it was, and yeah, how you can get your own pair of really nice glowing wristbands. It had its own issues though, like it was not very comfortable to wear over more than just a few minutes. You were sweating underneath it, the battery was quite heavy, and it was kind of large, unnecessarily large. So I started thinking about making a new version that's way more compact, way more comfortable to wear, and also, yeah, way more DIY, I would say. So this is going to be the first project ever where I will work with lithium batteries. And I found this really great microcontroller, this ESP32, that already comes with a connector for these for the batteries, for batteries. And yeah, you might not even see it, but directly behind it, I connected a battery. It's a 1100 milliampere hour one, and it can easily power this LED strip around your arm for about 12 hours. That's what I was testing it so far. That's what I was testing so far, and it's quite impressive. So yeah, that's the first glimpse on the Glowing Arms project version 2.0. Next I will basically work on the case, which is basically made out of two parts, one hard shell to protect the internal components like the battery and the microcontroller, and the other one is going to be a flexible thing where the LED strip actually gets into, and that's going to be surrounded by some nice fabric. So you actually have skin contact only with the fabric itself, and it's supposed to feel very comfortable, also while moving a lot and sweating a bit. So yeah, we'll see how that will work out, and yeah, that's gonna be in combination with the Glowing Stripes project, my project for next month. So I'm getting close to the finish line, and soon you will be able to use the Glowing Stripes project and the software I built yourself very soon, including the option to customize the LED animations and change between the LED animations. Basically some basic feature list for the Glowing Stripes project. Is what I would have said up to a few days ago. Because on Monday I had an unexpected turn of events. I was going to Exersign, the local hackspace in Berlin, which I really like, and they started having open evenings again, where people sit in front of the space, work on their projects, have a talk, and get to know each other, and quite a nice atmosphere. And I was working on my LED project, and then someone mentioned like, oh, by the way, have you ever heard about this library called VLED? And I said, no, never heard about it. I was taking a look on it on GitHub, and while I was reading through the repo README, I started to realize that the code I wrote over the last few months I can basically throw out of the window now. Because this library is just from a pure feature perspective, like the list of features it has, the stability, performance, that you can just easily switch between animations, customize them in an incredible way. It's just years ahead of what I built so far, and I honestly really struggled to get the C++ code working properly. I'm just not a C++ person, maybe. And so yeah, there was started some interesting thoughts. But hear me out. Does it mean that all the code I wrote now was for no reason? No. First of all, I learned some stuff about coding in C++ and microcontroller development. But the other thing is, there's one big flaw, I would say, with VLED, and that's, to put it mildly, the web interface is overwhelming, overly complicated, and not exactly easy to use and beginner friendly. So it's like one of these interfaces where once you experiment a bit and get the hang out of it, it's usable, but it certainly isn't what I would call beginner friendly. So here's my plan. I will take the front end that I already designed and develop partially the front end also, a front end code as well. I will take that front end and basically connect it with the library of VLED. And basically combining the immense features and stability of VLED together with a much more easy to use interface that's focusing on the most important features for the beginning, and then possibly extend and add more features of VLED later on. So to summarize, I will keep working on the Glowing Stripes project and connect the front end that I already designed together with the backend basically of VLED and the features they have. And when it comes to hardware, I now thankfully can also then further reduce the size of the glowing core because I only need one ESP instead of two. That's also something I wasn't able to do with my own code, but VLED has figured out somehow to prevent LEDs from just glitching whenever Wi-Fi is in use. And yeah, that means I do need to make some more smaller design changes, but also everything gets more compact, which is great and easier to build and less resource intensive basically. And yeah, besides the Glowing Stripes project, I will of course then continue with the glowing arms, and I hope I can already get a finished version up to end of next month, but we will see. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to the next month, and hope to see you all in the next update. Yeah, have a great June, and see you then. Bye.